I'm Danika Foster, and I will be reading my essay on Don Quixote and Individualism, written for the Messiah College Humanities Symposium, Spring 2012. Don Quixote de la Mancha was born into a society where everything was already laid out for him. His family had been nobility, his house large. Acquiring land for him was not a problem. In fact, we see that later in his life, holding on to this land was Don Quixote's true problem. Cervantes' use of historical setting and Quixote as a sort of modern tragic hero set the stage for us as readers to glean a well-rounded and challenging view of individualism in the light of what seems to be an unchanging society, a subject that only one other book before Don Quixote had ever done. In Don Quixote, Cervantes uses a juxtaposition of Quixote's created world, an ideal, his more true self, and the harsh views and criticism he receives from society to challenge the very foundations of that society. Quixote is mocked, scorned, belittled, and all but trod upon by his contemporaries, yet he clings to his own individual convictions, Cervantes giving voice to his societal criticisms by other characters' reactions to Quixote's impossible dream. As he explains this dream to everyone he encounters, even his companion Sancho Panza, Cervantes educates the reader about the importance of diversity of thought, gender roles, and a criticism of complacency in societal roles, a social agenda that was new to the world of written language at that time. El Señor Quijada, or at least as our future Don Quixote was originally named, was born into a noble family. Cervantes tells us that he is a hidalgo, or member of lower nobility, one that maintains the house and land of his ancestors, although his personal salary is beginning to run out. Our first glimpse of this Sir Quijada details how his money is spent, down to what he eats for every meal. His livings are meager, and he is tired, but our protagonist-to-be has a hobby. He enjoys reading books about the days of the knight-errant, books that eventually consume him, says Cervantes of our hero. You must know, then, that the above-named gentleman, whenever he was at leisure, which was mostly all the year round, gave himself up to reading books of chivalry with such ardor and avidity that he neglects literally every other duty he has. This neglect is Quijada's first mistake. In this day and age, it is impossible to reject a societal role. It is something one is born into, something that one literally becomes regardless of choice. Whether a pauper or the richest of kings, the feudal system, like the literary genres of Cervantes' day, were well established and never questioned. What we will witness here with the behavior of Don Quixote as a protagonist is unheard of and unthinkable. Quijada decides to take matters into his own hands, to change his destiny, and to begin to write his own story. Like Cervantes' mixing of styles and breaking of classical literary conventions to give us the book Don Quixote, Cervantes starts off his tale with a character who refuses to accept the rules, who sells his family property to buy books, and instead lives in a world that is completely his own, so much so that he is the only one in it. Cervantes uses this juxtaposition of the created and real world not only in Quixote's world, but in the writing of the story as well. The challenging of experiences and perceptions is an element that is very Baroque. However, Cervantes makes it very clear that he is doing something different. Instead of searching for truth, he as the author laughs with his audience at the impossibility of making a claim that one story may be completely true. What we see as an audience is a parallel created world, that of the novel Don Quixote, and that which Quijada, now known as Don Quixote de la Mancha, creates for himself. Cervantes promises his audience that he won't leave out even a speck of the truth in retelling this created story of ambiguous authorship. Meanwhile, while we observe the trials and tribulations of Don Quixote with the general public, he tries to present his ideals to them. The public, his critics, laugh at Don Quixote the way we might laugh at Cervantes if we weren't already subject to his master plan as readers. We see a ragged old man who picks a ragged old horse and a preoccupied stout sidekick to accompany him in the fixing of all of society's ills. What's better is that our unconventional hero fights for an imaginary maiden, one so pure she can't possibly exist. Yet for her, he literally falls off his horse, bruising everything but his pride in her name alone. After his first adventure with the cruel world, Quijana, now publicly known as Don Quixote de la Mancha, since he has found his mare to knight him, a very confused inn owner, who obliged him, laughing and taunting him the whole time, sets out to begin actually physically fighting bad things. Now more than ever, he is putting action behind his beliefs. Quixote is becoming a self-made man, despite all of the jeers and malicious comments from the general public. In Quixote's world, criticism doesn't exist. It's the perfect world for an author and a dreamer to share. In this perfect world, Quixote's creative space is Cervantes' creative license. Cervantes breaks yet another literary rule to which he also subjects Don Quixote very early on in the story. The hero's creativity mirroring none other than his brilliant author. He responds to criticism. In a scene where we find two of Don Quixote's neighbors are going through his books, trying to decide which books to censor for the evil things that they have done to Quixote, Cervantes responds to literary criticism that he himself had received. The priest, barber, and niece of Quixote miraculously come across one of Cervantes' early books on Quixote's shelf. They state that it wasn't extremely well received by the public, but decide to give it a second chance because they hear that there will be a sequel. In Cervantes' day, it was unheard of to respond to a literary criticism in a text, let alone to acknowledge it so boldly. Don Quixote was also given the chance to respond directly to a criticism that is directed at him. After our knight's first major battle, akin to a first major book publishing, Don Quixote is battered and bruised and spouting what seems to be senseless discourse of all the great heroes that he emulated while in battle. But by saying that he is each one of them, his neighbor escorting him home tries to bring him back to reality by telling him that he is simply Sir Quixote. At that moment, however, Don Quixote speaks perhaps the most powerful words of the book. "I know who I am." This commanding utterance dismisses all previous criticism and shows us once again that Don Quixote is well aware of the information that his neighbors and acquaintances are disseminating about him. However, none of the criticism matters to Quixote personally. Cervantes, with this scene, uses the voice of Don Quixote to say what he was trying to illustrate in the book censorship scene. He's not affected by the harsh criticisms of others, as he is loyal to and critical of himself alone. Cervantes has freed Don Quixote to speak his mind, and in doing so has freed himself to write honestly about any social criticisms that he has. To have a tragic hero that everyone criticizes and taunts wherever he goes, Cervantes has a mode to say whatever he wants. He may speak freely of Spanish pride, of anti-Moor and Turkish ideals, the treatment of women, of gender roles, and he may use the way he writes about Don Quixote to make fun of traditional literary confines. Cervantes' social agenda becomes evident each time Don Quixote enters a public situation, challenging the boundaries of society without even being aware of them. Cervantes, a contemporary of his own protagonist Don Quixote, wants to raise unique thought against his very society. As a member of the very social order he aims to criticize, he can neither give public voice to his ideas nor battle the censorship that is going on in Spain at this time without a strategic in. This creation of literature's one and only knight-errant, characterized by mere blunders and mishaps, allows him to do just that. In Quixote's social and physical blunders, we as readers are also tricked by the enchantment of Cervantes' story. We feel bad for his laughable hero, and without realizing it, what we read in jest somehow finds its way into our heads as Quixote works his way into our hearts. As Quixote slays his giants and stands beside impossible causes, Cervantes accomplishes through literature what he cannot accomplish through formal and informal personal discussions. Cervantes' gift to literature in the creation of this somewhat laughable yet feisty hero Quixote is an expansion of what can and cannot be included in literary conventions, of thought, of prose, and literature's first modern individual, himself.